Good evening, Ohio. James Ernest of The Grueling Truth here with John Crowther, author of many of your favorite wrestling comic books.
Hi. Thanks for having me on, James. I appreciate it.
Welcome. It's our pleasure. So when did you fall in love with professional wrestling?
Oh, God, that goes way back. I grew up in the state of Florida. I was born in 1971, so I grew up in the state of Florida loving championship wrestling from Florida.
Nice.
So I would say probably since about the age 6 on, I was just deep into it. Thanks to my great-grandfather, actually, of all people. I'd go over to his house, and he had a black and white TV. And he'd have that thing tuned into championship wrestling from Florida, and I'd see him really getting into it. And I just kind of followed suit and just continued with that passion from that point forward.
So who were your favorites early on?
Early on, well, I was a big fan of Dusty, Bugsy McGraw, Blackjack Mulligan. Of course, I saw, when a lot of those guys came through, like I saw Barry Windham, who was Blackjack's son, saw his debut, or right after his debut in Florida. Dustin Runnels, got to see him start his career there in Florida. So a lot of those guys, I was kind of into the old, I'm kind of a little bit rednecky myself, so kind of like those old rednecky style wrestlers that would come through. I used to always love Terry Funk when he would come through. And it was pretty cool because I am actually going to be working on a book for Terry.
Oh, wow.
Down the road, too, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So is it going to be exclusively about Terry, or is it going to be about the Funk brothers and the whole family will be involved?
Well, I've got the contract with Terry, so what we do with a lot of these books, if you haven't seen any of them yet, they are all biographical.
Uh-huh.
So what I do is I sit down with the guys and I talk to them and kind of learn about their early life, how they got into wrestling, and then we just kind of try and follow what the highlights of their career as they see it.
Uh-huh.
So hitting like what we may consider somebody's greatest match may not be in their eyes their greatest match. So I like to pull that stuff out, kind of find out the background. I like to stay kayfabe on the matches, so that I don't kind of take away that magic of pro wrestling. But but that being said, Terry's book will focus more on Terry. I'm sure we'll touch, a little bit on Dory Sr. I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on Dory Jr. But it's going to be primarily about Terry himself.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say, that is phenomenal. And I was going to say, unfortunately, with how things have been going in professional wrestling, Godspeed, because unfortunately our legends aren't staying around because of all the craziness going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I mean, over the years, last 4 or 5 years, some of the guys I've done books for included, Nikolai Volkov, Bruno Sammartino, Rocky Johnson. Mm-hmm. So, I've actually lost 3 of the guys that I did books for, which it's difficult because, you become friends with them over that time. I spent a lot of time, particularly with Rocky. We did a lot of shows together here in Florida and became pretty good friends. So to work with them and you learn all about them and you hear, their passion not only for the business but also for their fans. And it's pretty hard when you see them go.
Definitely. How did you learn to be a writer? I mean, did you originally intend to write this style, or was there other styles that you'd worked on originally?
Well, I've always written. I mean, as far back as I can remember, just being a little kid, I was always a writer. And, and I just kind of decided to combine the passions. But my first comics weren't wrestling comics. The first comic I ever wrote was actually a superhero comic that was published by Antarctic Press. It was called Rochelle. And then from there, I've done some horror stuff and some other genres. But wrestling just kind of actually came out about, because, you may know this, you may not, a lot of wrestling wrestlers are fans of comics, and they're fans
definitely.
of toys. And so kind of what happened, or exactly what happened, was Nikolai Volkov got a copy of my Rochelle comic, and we had a mutual friend, and he actually asked that I contact him. He wanted to talk to me, so I gave him a call, which was memorable in itself, because he's got a booming voice, and it really stood out. I mean, it's recognizable. It was recognizable. So I call him. It's like, "Hello, John. It's Nikolai."
Yeah.
And he says, over the years, I've wanted to do my life story in a comic, and I've had several people approach me about it, but no one's ever come through. And as soon as we get down to the nitty gritty about doing it, they always come up with an excuse and back out.
Yeah.
So I told him, I said, Nikolai, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I promise you I'm going to get it done. And that's kind of how I kind of made that transition over to doing the wrestling books. It was just pure luck. I mean, he saw something, he liked it, he reached out to me, and I thought it was great. I mean, I loved wrestling. Definitely. So what better thing to do than to tie the two genres together? And then I would always notice, I'd go to these comic book conventions, and, I'm approaching 50. I'm 1 year short. So I would notice as I'm sitting at these comic book conventions, who's walking around? I mean, you see these kids walking around, usually walking around with their dads, but it's their dads with the checkbooks.
Exactly.
And the credit cards. So the kids are picking up comics and stuff. The dads look bored. So I'm like, why not target those guys? I mean,
exactly.
if they're in my generation, they probably dug wrestling too. So let's give them something that they like too.
Definitely. And
it's been successful. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many people either loved wrestling or they, like I've said before to a lot of the guys when I write their books, wrestlers are like superheroes. So it's very easy to make that crossover from reading about superheroes to reading about pro wrestlers.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Wrestling is somewhere in between Greek mythology and comic books because they're definitely larger-than-life characters. I mean, it's amazing the feats of strength they can accomplish.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that you're saying the exact thing I usually say. I mean, I remember talking to, and it's funny, Brian Blair, we did a series for the Killer Bees, and when I first interviewed Brian, he was telling me when he was a kid, I asked him, how'd you decide you want to be a pro wrestler? And he said, well, when I was a kid, he said I was about 5-6 years old, I already was telling people I wanted to be a pro wrestler, or one other thing. He goes, I figured I either want to be a pro wrestler or I wanted to be a Superman.
Yep.
So he said one day he tied a towel around his neck and got up on his couch and jumped off, and he went face first into the pillows on the floor. And he realized at that point that he couldn't really fly, but he could still be a pro wrestler.
Exactly.
So he said that's kind of how he made that choice. I mean, but like you said, I mean, you've got guys getting in the ring that, when you watch it on TV, they're guys and gals. They're bigger than life. They're faster than life. They do these amazing things. You got 300-pound guys climbing to the top of the rope and leaping off and just doing these unbelievable things, and they're all dressed in costume. I mean, it's the closest thing to a living, breathing comic book superhero that we got.
Yeah, Brian's phenomenal. We had him on the show a couple times now, talking about his Cauliflower Alley Club.
Yeah, actually, I'm a member of the Cauliflower Alley Club.
Oh, cool.
Which I will toss something out there, and you may or may not have seen it on my wall. This Saturday, actually, we're doing a pay-per-view on Fight TV.
Oh.
And they're selling pay-per-view tickets to it. And all the proceeds go to benefit the Cauliflower Alley Club.
Oh, nice.
And for people who may be listening or that don't realize what the Cauliflower Alley Club is, a lot of wrestlers over the years, I mean, it may be a little bit different now, but they didn't have insurance, Yeah. And you like the Four Horsemen, you might have heard them talk the talk, but outside of the ring, they weren't necessarily always walking the walk. I mean, these guys, they had pretty modest salaries, and the money they did make, a lot of it they had to spend themselves on hotels and travel or whatnot. So what the Cauliflower Alley does is it tries to help these guys that can't afford medical care or have other issues that arise. They have funds that are gathered that are then used to help some of these veterans out, down the road. So what's going to happen is I'm actually going to be paired with the Bushwhackers, and we'll be talking about a project I'm working on with them. We've got Diamond Dallas Page is going to be on, The Big Show, Eric Bischoff, real nice lineup. And like I said, it's going to air this Saturday. I think it starts at 7, and it'll run till probably, I think, about 11 or 12 o'clock at night.
Aw, I ain't gonna lie. I'm disappointed to hear that it's going to be the Bushwhackers and not the Sheep Herders.
Well, we'll try and see if the Sheep Herders will show up.
Exactly, because that is the fun thing with some of the tag teams when they change the name, even though it's the same people. Like unfortunately, with Animal passing recently, you would always get that debate: the Legion of Doom versus the Road Warriors, and you're like, no, they're the same thing, and I'm like, no, they're completely different. They were the same characters or same people,
exactly.
But they were.
One guy, a good buddy of mine, I like to tease him about that, is Fred Aldman, if you know Fred.
Yeah.
And of course, Fred was he was a bunch of guys, but he was Big Steel Man. He was Tugboat, he was Typhoon, and he was the infamous Shockmaster.
Yep.
So I've always joked, he signs up to do a show, and they've actually got 4 wrestlers in one.
Exactly. Oh yeah, he embraces it all. I've seen some of his shirts and stuff that he does, where he's got all the different faces. How like they did the faces of Foley. He's got the faces of Oatman, and yeah.
Oh, exactly. In fact, one of the promo pictures he's usually brings around to the shows with him is the 3 faces of Oddman, and it's got the Shockmaster, Typhoon, and Tugboat. So yeah, like you said, it's a lot of fun. They've done so many different things. Even the Bushwhackers. I mean, it was more than Bushwhackers and Sheep Herders. They were known as the New Zealand Kiwis. Actually, Luke, at one point, he had more of an Adrian Street type of gimmick. He went by a guy named Sweet Teddy Williams is what he went by when he initially started in pro wrestling, which is, you can read all about it in our book. But it's pretty interesting because a lot of people don't realize that, because when he had that gimmick, he did a lot of that down in New Zealand and Australia, and for a short time up in Canada, but he didn't really do much of that in the United States.
Definitely. And when I say to give out this information, it's not because we're going to end the interview. It's because I want it to be given out multiple times. Where can people get the books?
Okay. Well, the wrestling comics, you can actually find us. We've got, I'm kind of thinking, if you Google Squared Circle Comics, it'll pop up on Google. We're actually an imprint of Inverse Press, and how that came about was I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the different crowdfunding sites such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo and such. So when I started talking to Nikolai, I wanted to find an outlet to kind of get the books out there without having to necessarily push it right at a publisher. Reason being that I'm not just a comic book writer. I'm also an attorney during the day. So my time frame for getting things done isn't necessarily the same as a person who's doing comics as a full blown career. So I needed to be able to have gaps between when books were able to be put together and stuff like that. So I kind of watched a few of these Kickstarters and backed a couple guys just to kind of see people who were good at it. People who really advertised their stuff and actually got things done. And I came across a gentleman by the name of Kevin Laporte who does horror comics, which is cool because it's another genre I'm into. And I backed a couple things he did. They had a really good track record. So I got together with Kevin. He lives up in Alabama, and with his girlfriend, and we put together Squared Circle Comics as an imprint of Inverse Press. So I know it's a kind of a long, winding way of getting there, but if you Googled Inverse Press or Squared Circle Comics, I'm sure you could pop up and find where you can buy those online. Digital copies, we've got them on Amazon, and we've got them on Comixology. You can find them that way. If people want to look me up on Facebook or anywhere like that, I'm more than happy. I got tons of books, copies, my comp copies here at the house. I'm always happy to sign them and ship them out too. So
awesome.
Anyway, like that, yeah.
So you mentioned Rocky Johnson. Does it go into about his father-in-law? Because with him being, he was a second-generation wrestler, or is
absolutely.
It more just is it more just his career, or it probably transcends the whole the Rocky clan?
It touches. Yeah, it's a one-shot comic. It touches on a little bit of everybody. Obviously, we've got Peter Maivia in there because we talk about his marriage and we talk about The Rock being born. And Rock makes a couple of appearances in the comic. But no, primarily it is about Rocky. He was an amazing wrestler in his own right. And a lot of people don't realize he was actually a boxer for quite a bit of time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I did not know.
Yeah, he was a sparring partner for George Foreman. He sparred with Muhammad Ali. He did a lot of stuff. So what was really cool was back in those territorial days, before WWE and such, where everything was on the internet and everything was on cable and everybody knew what everybody was doing at every moment of the day. The territories were different, and they were able to promote some pretty cool stuff. So what they did was, I don't know if you remember, do you remember the match where I think it was Muhammad Ali took on, what was his name over in Japan?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
He took on Baba. And they had, they put this gimmick match together where it was the boxer against the wrestler.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time that was going on, Jerry Lawler did the same thing, but with Rocky Johnson.
Huh.
And what they were able to do, because Rocky had actually been a boxer, they had a lot of the old photos of him boxing, and they had pictures of him with Foreman and Ali. So they built him up as a boxer that was coming into Memphis to take on Jerry Lawler. And they ran that at the same time. You should look that stuff up. It's actually really entertaining. They ran that at the same time that they were doing the Muhammad Ali Baba gimmick. And it went over really well. So they were able to do stuff like that. So when Rocky traveled around the territories, he was, I remember him telling me, he was like the first black champion in so many territories, because he broke down a lot of racial barriers back then. But one of the things they did with him, because he had that boxing background, if you look up his track record on Rocky Johnson, he had a lot of brass knuckles championships all over the country. So he was like the Florida brass knuckles champion. He was the Georgia brass knuckles champion, Texas brass knuckles champion. So they kind of did that with him to kind of play off on that whole boxing career he had.
So did his name inspire any movies, out of curiosity?
Oh, Rocky Johnson? Not that I'm aware of. No.
Okay.
I think that the Rocky movie was actually based off, from what I've read, I think it was based off Rocky Marciano. And I'm trying to think who. I mean, his name came off. Now, if you talk about that, he did base his name off boxers. From what he told me, his name, the Rocky, came off from Rocky Marciano, and Johnson was from Jack Johnson, the black boxer, and that's how he came up with changing his name actually to Rocky Johnson. Because his real name is Wade Bowes.
Awesome. So you got him, you got the Killer Bees, you got the Bushwhackers coming up.
Yeah, we've done, the Bushwhackers aren't going to be a comic. Theirs is actually a prose biography. It's going to be about 350 pages.
Oh.
But some of the other comics we've done, like you said, I've done Nikolai's. We did a 3-issue series. We're working on a 3-issue series for Bruno Sammartino. We did a 3-issue series for the Killer Bees. We've got a 3-issue series for Rock and Roll Express. Books that are already done, Jake Hager, Lanny Poffo. We're midway through a 3-issue series for Hacksaw Jim Duggan. We've got a couple of the original, I don't know if you're ever a fan of Glow.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, yeah.
Exactly, and they've got the Netflix show now. Well, we've already done a book for Sunny the California Girl, and our artist is currently working on a book for Hollywood, who was actually the first Glow wrestler ever signed, Jeannie Basone. So, and we've got a couple other girls who want to do it too. So our plan is to get 2 or 3 of those one-shots together and then release it as a trade.
Oh, nice.
So that's another one. Yeah, some upcoming books we've got. I mentioned to you earlier Terry Funk. We've got Magnum TA, which is a special one to me. I was a big fan of Magnums, and we talked up in Jacksonville, Florida. I was doing a convention with him, and he had been approached 2 or 3 times, he said, about doing his life story, and he's never done it ever since he had that horrific accident that really took him out of wrestling. So our comic, the biographical comic, will actually be the first book he has ever written since that accident happened. So I'm feel pretty privileged to be able to do that. So got one coming out for him. We've got one coming out for Billy Gunn.
Nice.
Which is pretty cool. I mean, he's got a really interesting backstory. A lot of people don't realize he was actually a professional rodeo guy before he ever got into pro wrestling. So I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit of that stuff for him. Which kind of reminds, and one of the reasons when I find guys to write stories for is we try and find guys with extremely interesting backgrounds. Whether it be someone like a Nikolai who, although he didn't defect from the Soviet Union, he did defect from a communist country to get to the United States. So a little bit different than your average wrestler from nowadays. So we had that. We had Bruno, who literally hid with his mother and siblings in the mountains in Italy from the Nazis. He was almost executed by Nazis as a young boy, actually.
Oh, my.
And he couldn't get into the United States initially because he was so unhealthy. He couldn't pass the physical. But then 10 years after he got into the States, he had the world record in the bench press, which is a pretty amazing feat when you think about it.
Yeah.
A guy who was so unhealthy he couldn't even get in the country, and a decade later he's got the world record in the bench press. I mean, that's pretty amazing. But all of these guys. Another guy we did a book for, and we're about to wrap up the series, is Bobby Fulton from the Fantastics. And one of the neat things about Bobby's story is Bobby was literally a wrestling fan like you or I, who eventually cracked into the business by just hanging around long enough. And I remember I asked him about what was your first match, and he said, well, he'd been working the rings, setting up the rings, and just kind of helping out, but nobody had smartened him up to the business. People didn't do that back then, you know. And unless you were an insider, you didn't really know what was real and what was scripted. So he shows up at a show in Chillicothe, Ohio. He's about 17 years old, and first match of the evening, one of the guys didn't show up. So the booker of the show says, "Hey, Fulton," or actually his name was Hines. "Hey, Jimmy Hines, you got your gear?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, get ready. You're in the first match tonight." So he's like, "Really?" So he throws his shoes on and he comes down and gets in the ring, and his opponent comes down and gets in the ring. Well, his opponent had never been smartened up either.
Oh, dang.
So he says, they ring the bell, and these two just start going at it, toe to toe, really, literally beating the hell out of each other. And probably about 5 minutes in, they opened up the locker room doors, and everybody stormed down. Remember, like one of JR's Pier 6 brawls.
Yeah.
And cleared the ring, God, the fans were all screaming and happy. He says he had the crap kicked out of him. He had a black eye, a bloody nose. And at the end of the night, he got paid $10, and he knew he was a pro wrestler.
Nice.
But it wasn't until after that they actually smartened him up to the business. So whether it was a rib on him, I don't know, but it's kind of interesting how things worked out back then. But he literally was a fan like you or I, who, because he stuck around the business, befriended the right people, put in his time, he got to be a pro wrestler and an NWA champion. So interesting stuff.
That is awesome. Yeah, I was going to say we've had him do a couple of the shows that I've helped promote.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, because fortunately I've had the pleasure of doing 3 of them. We did one with NWF, so Roger Ruffin, which we had Abyss, we had Chris Harris, and Carl Anderson in that one.
Okay.
And then we did some stuff with Heartland Wrestling, which we had the Highlanders and Cody Hall and Sharkboy. Yeah, so that was a good one. And then the last one, the Legends of Squared Circle, where we had the Highlanders again, and we had Jimmy Wang Yang and his daughter, who...
oh, wow, she wrestles. Huh?
Oh, yeah, she's really good, and she's only 16.
Oh, wow, good for her.
Yeah, so she's one of those ones that, 10 years from now, we're going to be like going, yeah, I remember when she did our event, and, that kind of thing.
That's great. Yeah, that's one of the things I've wanted to try and focus on over the next couple of years is to try and reach out and maybe do a few more of the girl professional wrestlers. I actually was speaking with, last night actually I was on the phone with ODB. And
nice.
It looks like we'll probably do a book for ODB. I've been in discussions with Thunder Rosa, which is another possibility. Me personally, she reminds me a lot of the throwback wrestling. Yep. And I am a big fan of NWA Power, so... it'd be an honor to do hers, and I think, honestly, in my personal opinion, she may be the hottest female performer in the ring right now. In just my humble opinion, I just think that she really brings something unique
what you mean. Yep.
to the business. So
very talented. Yep. Yeah, so it sounds like things are going great with the comics and your other work. Nikita Koloff, I heard that you had one for him.
Well, no, I've talked to Nikita in the past, and it's a possibility that we may do something. It's been a little while. Right now, we're booked out until 2023.
Oh, wow.
But my door is always open to talk to Nikita. I was a big fan of Nikita's growing up. I did neglect to mention one we do have coming, though, is Dan Severn, who is another pretty amazing guy. I mean, he was Brock Lesnar before Brock Lesnar was probably even born.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, but no, we don't have anything signed up with Nikita, but I would be honored to do Nikita's story. I remember when he came in to the business, he was pretty young. He was very tight with the Road Warriors, actually. Yep.
In fact, I believe it was them who got him into the business. But I would love to do his story, too, yeah.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And he's kind of making a resurgence because he's now managing the Koloff dynasty.
Yes. Yes, I think that's in NWA, isn't it? Because I think I saw him pop up before they started suspending their tapings.
Exactly.
When the apocalypse hit, yeah.
Sorry about that. That was the son.
The family, exactly.
Yeah, you know how family is. But
is he a wrestling fan too?
He is. Unfortunately, he has one in particular that he obsesses on, and he's a big John Cena fan.
he can actually see him now.
Yes, surprisingly, yes.
That's a magic power. It's a magic power.
Exactly. Yeah, and Owen doesn't get that joke, unfortunately. I try to explain that to him. He's like, "Huh? What do you mean I can't see him? He's right there." Like, that's what John used to say. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a wrestler for everybody, and I think John Cena he's done a lot of good, not just in the wrestling business, but for a lot of folks outside of the wrestling business.
Oh yeah, he does so many of those Make-A-Wish. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Now you mentioned Dan. Dan also been on the show. He's great. I mean, gosh, you probably went into about how he was in the Olympics, twice?
Oh yeah, I mean, and God, how many belts did he hold?
Oh,
at one point?
Pretty much everybody's. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He had everything, but not just in wrestling, but in mixed martial arts and all that stuff. So
exactly.
He was sorry about that. We've got a house full of you've got children. We've got a house full of exotic animals.
Oh, cool.
Every once in a while, I get an odd noise, so I had to check that out. But Dan was he was freaking amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean he's in so many Hall of Fames and
Oh yeah, but he could really bring it, which was something new back then.
Exactly.
I mean he was a guy who legitimately, I mean if you think about wrestling back in the early years, if you go back into like the 40s and 50s.
Oh yeah, they used to really stretch the back.
And if you were a champion, you were more likely than not you were a shooter.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was, you wanted to make sure you could keep the belt on you, because as your champion was traveling around the different territories, anybody wanted to have the belt because it meant more money. So you'd have to have a shooter hold the belt so you could keep it. But he definitely could have been a shooter back in the 80s and 90s when he was going.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, some of the amazing things. I mean, heck, he took the NWA belt to UFC.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, it's just so phenomenal. So it sounds like you've got a lot of great books coming up. You've already got a lot of great books out. The last one I do want to talk about before I let you go is I want to find out about the encyclopedia.
Oh, okay, yeah, the encyclopedia, what that is, and we're going to keep doing those. We decided, I love collected books. So after we got a bunch of books completed, like single issues, we had Killer Bees 1 and 2 done. We had Ricky Morton's book done for Rock and Roll Express. I'm trying to think who all was in that first one. Nikolai. I think we only put issue 1 of Nikolai in there. We had Hacksaw's first issue. We had Lanny Poffo's, Bobby Fulton's. We had Patricia Summerlin, who, of course, was with Glow, Sonny. And what we did is we put them together into a collected, we called it an encyclopedia, but it's really all those books collected. And then we also threw in some kind of encyclopedic entries. So we have entries on Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, a bunch of those guys. And it actually came out to a nice book. It's over 200 pages. Just a really beautiful book. So what we're going to do is with the next set of books, as we do the individual books, we'll come out with a second volume of the encyclopedia.
Oh, nice.
Obviously, we'll keep going on. We'll have a third, we'll have a fourth.
Exactly.
As long as we're doing them, we'll keep pumping out those encyclopedias, too, as collected volumes.
That's phenomenal. So in other words, you can go with the individual, but you can also have the collection with the encyclopedia. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's pretty cool, I'm sure you've seen that encyclopedia that people take to all the wrestling cons and get it signed. I mean, most of our guys are still living, breathing guys. I mean, you could take that around. It's a good thing to collect autographs on. And to me, it's kind of neat because it's more than just a photo. It's their life story.
Exactly.
So it's something a little bit more unique for the wrestling fan and the comic book fan. Which reminds me of something we started up this week. If people who are looking to maybe get in on some of these wrestling titles is, have you ever heard of Patreon?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we started up a Patreon account. I'm not sure where we're at on it yet, but what it is you can buy an annual subscription, and you'll basically get, I think it's like 9 to 10 comics a year, and a box. There's like a special comic art box that we've got signed. And I think the first, I want to say it was the first 13 people that signed up got a Rock and Roll Express issue number 1 signed by both Ricky and Robert, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So it's pretty neat, and you get some exclusive content. For instance, when we start Robert's new book, I just started on his script actually this week, and you'll see that one come together in digital form before it's actually released, and then obviously you'll get the print copy before it actually goes up on Kickstarter. So it's kind of a neat little way to kind of stay just a little bit ahead of the game and get some exclusive covers and things like that too.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say those are the ones that are really the collector issue, the collector item is, like you said, with Patreon and Kickstarter, the ones that you can get through them before anything else is released. So, I mean...
Yeah, exactly. Now, the Nikolai book actually even went beyond us. I got that one picked up by Antarctic Press. So if anybody who does hit the regular comic shops, if you keep an eye open for, and I'm sure you can buy it online too, like through eBay and sites like that, and maybe even online with Antarctic Press still, because it came out about a year ago, was the Nikolai series. We did something called Turnbuckle Titans, Nikolai Volkov, and we did the entire 3-issue run with Antarctic and made it available in comic stores.
Sounds phenomenal. So before we let you go one more time, we want you to give out that internet information, the YouTube, the social media, all the good stuff where we can find out more about you and your work.
Okay, absolutely. You can find anything on the wrestling books. Just look up Squared Circle Comics. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Anything like that, you'll find us. You can find me personally, John Crowther. I've got a writer's page. I've got a personal Facebook page. I generally, unless you look like a zombie or something really scary, I'll accept just about anybody. And it's pretty cool because I like to communicate with. I really like communicating with fans, especially talking wrestling and stuff like that. I find it interesting, and I'm always open to talk. So you can find me there. You can find us at Squared Circle. You can find us at John E. Crowther, writer, anywhere like that. A lot of my books you can find also with Antarctic Press. Beyond the wrestling, I've written some horror comics for them. I've written for their Exciting Comic series and the Rochelle series. I've got a couple stuff out with Heavy Metal Magazine. The next, just a little tidbit for you, the next wrestling comic that's going to come out is actually for Gangrel.
Ooh.
And we're gonna take that to Kickstarter in November. It's a really cool book. It's about 37-pager. Really gets into depth. It talks about Luna. It talks about when he was with the Black Hearts and his training with the Hearts up in Calgary. A really cool book. I'm trying to think after that. I think it's going to be the Robert Gibson's book. I think is following that one, or Bruno #2. The Bushwhackers, as I mentioned, I'm doing a 350-page prose book for them every Wednesday night. I'm generally online chatting with Luke, who's in Clearwater, Florida, and Butch, who's still down in New Zealand. And we're about 170 pages or so into the book right now writing. So I figure sometime mid-2021 is when we'll release that book. Right now it looks like we're going to be releasing it through Kenny Casanova and his publishing company. Of course, he's the publisher that did Brutus Beefcakes and Kamala's book and a bunch of those guys, Danny Davis. And it's really entertaining. I mean, if you were a fan of the Sheep Herders or the Bushwhackers, it really goes in depth. We've got some great contributions from other guys, Rip Rogers, Steve Kern, it just goes on and on. Superstar Bill Dundee, all these guys that we've been chatting who are putting in their 2 cents, for the book too, because these guys go way back and did some pretty crazy stuff over the years. So check that stuff out.
Definitely. Thank you, John, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, James, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.